Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Today we've got some great stuff going on. Let's go ahead and pray first. Father, thank you for this time together. Father, thank you for the things that you've been showing me and helped me to understand. Father, please help everybody to understand these things today. We just commit this word to you and help us to understand how the Old Testament and New Testament correlate and work together. We just ask this in Jesus' name. All right, so we are going to be talking about Israel, the Assyrian exile, and the rise of Samaria. Now, this is a lot of stuff into a little bit of time, so just bear with me, and I've kind of shortened everything down. So, in 313 AD, Constantine enacted the Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan basically was that Christianity became legal in the Roman Empire. But interestingly enough, legalizing Christianity and making it much easier to be a Christian is not always a good thing, because what we find is that hearts tend to grow cold when things are really easy and there's no problems and no issues. Hearts tend to grow a little cold. And once we get into the Christian history next year, we'll talk more about that. But today, we're going to find that in the midst of really bad times, God begins to work really mightily. And that's what we're going to see today. So in the end, I want you to think, is it better that things are really easy in the world and no problems, everybody's a Christian, everybody's happy, or is it better when God is really working and doing great things in the church and everything else? So we'll see that in the end. All right. Now, we are at the point where Israel now, is split off from Judah. That's what we talked about last week. Now, it's interesting, this particular time frame, around this time and a little bit after, was really at what I like to call God's chosen time. For about 600 years, in history, there could not have been a better time to get a country going than this time. Because Egypt was going down. They've really gone way down. There was no major superpower for about 600 years, till it was around 800 BC when Assyria was really beginning to rise. We'll see them later. But the thing is, they would have 600 years of reprieve and there wouldn't be anything. After that, superpowers would dominate this area up until today. So, God gave them plenty of time to subdue their enemies, plenty of time to grow as a nation, to get along with each other, but they did not take advantage of it. Maybe, I would even say 150 years is actually a little bit being nice. Out of the 600 years, they really only maybe spent about 150 years, most likely a little bit less than that. Really only within the first 3 kings did they really have the time to take advantage of this, without splitting up, without fighting with each other, without having any other problems. From Judges on, they kind of sought idols instead. So they didn't really take advantage of this great time. So let's talk about the Assyrians. The Assyrians, there's a couple guys in the Old Testament that we just got to know. Number 1, it's the Assyrians. Number 2, the Babylonians. Okay, we need to know about the Egyptians, and we'll learn about the Persians later. So here's the first of those guys, the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians, they've been around for a long time. So they actually had 3 different capitals. Ashur. Now, the capital of Ashur is where we get Ashtoreth poles. Remember those? We see those guys all the time. Ashtoreth poles. They're worshiping Ashtoreth poles. That comes because that is the national deity. Remember, it was a she. Do you guys remember who Ashtoreth's husband was? Baal, yes, Baal. So Ashtoreth's husband was Baal. So you almost always see those two together. Baal worship, Ashtoreth worship, all the time together. All right, and what do we call the type of religion when two or more are together? No, that is polytheism. Synchronism. That's the word, synchronistic, meaning they're actually combining multiple religions together. That is a good word to know because the majority of time in the Bible, people are synchronistic. All right, Nimrod. Nimrod was the next one. And it's interesting because in 2014, Nimrod actually is in Iraq. The ISIS people came in and literally flattened it. We're going to find that the Muslims are not real happy with a lot of these old ancient excavations, so they didn't do a lot. Now, granted, the Western world didn't do that great with them either. All right, Nineveh. Now, Nineveh is the guy we see with Jonah. Remember, Jonah goes to Nineveh, preaches everything else. Well, Nineveh was the capital. Now, Nineveh was actually, so now it's interesting because I would say that's a probably good time frame to see when Jonah went there. Most likely, I'm thinking Jonah probably went during it was done the capital, so he probably was in during that time. Now, with Nineveh, they would be destroyed by the Babylonian Empire, ending the Assyrians. So again, we got to know about the Assyrians because the Bible talks about them a lot. So the Neo-Assyrian Empire is the one we're interested in. Neo meaning new. Although it existed from them, they actually really started to become an empire at around 800, right before the time of the exile. Now, there are two major kings that we kind of got to get to know here. And there's actually a lot more than that, but I'm only going to go into these two because we don't have much time. Now, the first one is Tiglath-Pileser. Doesn't that sound like a beer? I don't drink beer, but it just kind of sounds, hi, welcome, now we have Tiglath-Pileser beer. Yes, you go ahead and buy him. He was a great guy. You know, I don't know. But he was the guy. Now, there were actually, when they deported Israel, there was 3 waves of deportations going on there over a 10-year time. So he was the guy who was really big in the first one. And he was actually, they considered him a pretty good king, actually. He has he's pretty famous. Anyway, then Shalmaneser came in the second, and Shalmaneser was the guy who did the second and third exiles. This is the guy we're going to be dealing with the most today. That's a picture of Shalmaneser there, if you're wondering. I know it's great. You can see how good-looking guy he is. All right. This is the Assyrian Empire. Now, notice with this, let me see. Hey, Jeff, where's the laser pointer on here? Right at the top? Oh, there it is. Ah, yes. Remember we talked about it here. This is Arabia in here. This stuff is so much desert. This is just nasty area. You're going to find that most places, they're not going to, these guys are never going to be. Why would you want to attack desert sand? You really wouldn't, unless you're the American army going after Iraq. But other than that, most other people really don't do that. So all of this comes to Syria. Now notice Egypt's part of it, Babylon's part of it, and these guys over here will be important. These guys are the Medes over here. So, and the majority of if you guys see their capitals are all going to be in this area here. All right, so that's them. The Assyrians were known for being very cruel, not nice guys. They would put rings in the cheeks of people to drag them along. They would they would poke out like 20,000 of their captives' eyes, one of their eyes, to make sure that they're not going to go anywhere. But the big thing also is that they used everybody as slave labor, and they would deport them. But interestingly enough, slave labor in the Middle East would continue until 1970. All right? The Muslims would continue to have slave labor even into the 70s. Now, that's the major countries. ISIS, Boko Haram, they still use slave labor. Okay, so these guys are not very good. So they use that. So in this area, there has always been that, and sadly, it's not good. So what they used to do, though, they would use cruel and violent ways to subdue the people. And basically what it is they do that so that the next people they come to would not want to mess around. So, okay, we'll give up. We give up. Oh, yes, we give up. They're not going to mess with them. And we're going to find that Israel, unfortunately, did not heed that advice. So, but this is really one of the sad things in history. Now, for instance, this picture right here, this picture, as we see, is a picture of people their skin being flayed off, meaning they took their skin off and they would hang them over the doorposts and over the city, people's skin. So basically, if you want to become skinless, that's, we sometimes like get skinless chicken. Well, anyway, you can get the picture. So it's kind of sad. It's a sad history, though, because these guys were really, really evil. They would intentionally advertise their brutality. For instance, like this. What they do is they put people on poles outside the city. Now remember, the Romans were not the first ones to do this with the people on the cross. These guys actually put people on poles also. But for guys, I threw this extra thing in there. That's really not the only time we've done that. We find that a guy named Vlad Dracul in the 14th century, he was actually around Hungary, Bulgaria area. So what he did is he actually took sticks and put people's rectums in it. And people would slowly die as the day goes on. Okay, it was very, very cruel. And we can go all the way back to here to see that that's what they did. That's where got the guy Dracula from, was the guy who did that. So Vlad Dracul is a very, very evil person, very evil. I'm sorry this is rated R, I'm sorry. No more rated R stuff, I promise. All right, the Assyrians would be defeated. Now, by Nebuchadnezzar. Actually, Nebuchadnezzar would be the real guy because Nebuchadnezzar was Nebuchadnezzar's dad. And again, we find, remember, where we have Nebuchadnezzar's distant ancestors. They were great guitar players. Could Nebuchadnezzar? I'm sure he played some kind of instrument because, his ancestors did, right? Anyway, the Babylonians would actually be the ones to take out Assyria. And basically, we find that in the Medes and the Persians would be there afterwards. Babylonians would be first, then the Medes and Persians would do it. Okay, and if you want to look up where those guys are at, that's that. And actually, I took Jeff's advice. I did purposely add more of the Bible stuff in there, just Bible verses for that, because I wanted to throw out everything. Yeah, I took your advice from last week. So the Assyrians would actually fall to the Babylonians, and the Babylonians would rise. So, but, just because they fell, the Babylonians are not very good, nice guys either.
John, the ZZ Top issue, that's all we need. That wasn't me, that was you.
What?
Sort of clarify.
What?
I made the suggestion about the references, but you picked the ZZ Top picture.
Well, yeah, the ZZ, you've got to have ZZ Top in there. I mean, why else would you want, like I said, you've got to remember Nebuchadnezzar had to have been a guitar player because, look at these guys, by the way, I'm a guitar player. I'm a musician, so I write, yes. Yeah. All right. All right, Jonah and the whale. Ooh, why would I put Jonah in here? Well, now, Jonah, because the Assyrians were really, really bad people, okay, like we just described, it's no wonder that Jonah jumped on a ship and went to Europe. Seriously, it's interesting because you would think, well, why didn't he go to Egypt? Why didn't he go up to north? You got to remember, these guys, the Assyrians, were everywhere at that time. So he jumped on a ship and went away from them. And the thing is, God told him, go to Nineveh. Oh, right, yeah, Nineveh. They're going to flay my skin. They're going to put a ring in my nose. They're going to poke my eye out. They're going to put me on a pole just for telling him to turn and repent. Well, the thing is, Nineveh was 900 miles away. It'd be like going to Nashville. I'm not Memphis, Tennessee. My dad lives in Greenville, Mississippi, which is 1,100 miles. So if you go around to Memphis, that's about 900 miles. That's a long way. But also, he got mad at God because God forgave the city. But think about this for a minute, and we can understand Jonah. It'd be like us going in 1945 through war-torn Berlin. So God says, okay, Jeff, I want you to go through Berlin, dodge the bombs that are falling, dodge all the artillery, dodge the guys shooting at you, and I want you to go to the Reichstag, and I want you to go to Hitler, who's already killed 6 million Jews and killed 2 million Russians and killed all these people, and I want you to go and preach to Hitler. And I want you to tell him that if he repents, I'll forgive him and all of his cronies. Think about it. Would you want to do that? And would you be mad at God for saying, why would you forgive these awful, terrible people? That's what Jonah went through. If you can understand the Assyrians, you can understand that Jonah most likely was more like us than we think he is. Because I would have did the same thing. I would have left and went the other way. I'm like, I'm not getting my skin flaked. I like this skin. I don't want this. I don't want to become all all muscular because there's no skin. So the thing is, we can have some understanding of Jonah, because if we look at it that way, Jonah is really understandable. And that's why I love about the Bible. It's more like us than we think it is. All right, let's talk about a few of the kings of Israel while we're here. So Omri was the king of Israel. And first and foremost, I want to give a retraction. I was wrong last week. I've been waiting all week to do this. The kings of Israel actually one time went to the fourth son, not the second son. They had 4 sons, but almost all the other times, the kings of Israel basically, died because of coup. And this is no exception. Zimri killed Elah, which is the king before him, and he was king for 7 days. And this guy Omri comes in and goes after Zimri to kill him. Zimri in the capital said, "Okay, guys, come get me," and he burns the capital down and died in the fire. These guys were not good people. So Omri actually had to build a new capital. And lo and behold, he found a hill called Samaria Hill. Samaritan? They're those guys. So that's their capital actually became Samaria from this. Now, the thing is, this is not the Sumerians yet. These are still Israeli. The Sumerians will come afterwards. But this is Omri. He's the guy who actually built the capital of Samaria. All right. Ahab. Ahab was a really bad guy, and his wife is Jezebel, and she was a bad woman. She was not a Jew, so he should have never married her in the first place, but then again, that didn't stop Solomon. So Ahab, the big thing with these guys, they were big-time Baal worshipers. Big time. And let me tell you, when you live in Israel, they will kill you if you're a Christian. They were hiding Christians in caves during Ahab's reign, it says in the Word. They were hiding him. And he did have a lot of run-ins with Elijah and Elisha. Elisha was mostly found around Ahab's time. Okay? And so he did actually turn to God once. And God actually prolonged his life. But the rest of the time he was very, very evil. So the last king of Israel is Hoshea. And he took control after killing the guy ahead of him. Man, these guys are great guys. So think about if presidents did that. Presidents like, okay, we're going to take the guy out now, so we're just going to kill him and we'll become president. It's kind of a scary thought. But the thing is, he led up to Israel's demise. He was the last guy that actually led to the captivity. Now let's talk about the events that led to the exile. And I know I'm going through this fast, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to just go kind of cruise through this. In 732, Tiglath-Pileser, the beer guy, began deportations of the people in Israel. Now, he just started this. These guys did this. They just said, you're going to come in here, and I'm just going to start taking people away. And they did. Remember, they took people to be slaves. All right. So Hosea paid tribute to him. Now, if you don't know what tribute is, tribute basically means that I'm going to pay you to keep you out of my country. Now, you can think of it a couple ways. Like, for instance, the mob making businesses pay protection money. You may have heard of that. Well, that's what tribute is. Yeah, you pay protection money. I'm not going to come after your business and break your knees. Okay? That's tribute. History has a way, in history, though, we find that that's a way of one country extorting money from, and interestingly enough, what Israel actually ended up doing was going to every person, every man in the whole of Israel, and he took money from them to pay for these guys. That's a lot of money. Everybody had to pay up. So the thing is, in history, we also find many countries doing this. So Hosea got tired of doing this, tired of going and begging for money from his people to pay off Assyria. So he did what everybody else does. Where do you go when things get bad? Egypt. Well, that was a bad idea. Because, Egypt, the problem with Egypt was not that strong at this point. And Assyria already had them, most likely, in their pockets also. So Assyria found out that Israel went to Egypt. Now, interestingly enough, and this is sadly enough, when Judah was in the Babylonian crisis, the next guys, they did the same thing. But the thing is, so what they did was Assyria said, hey, you know what? You guys going to do this? That's it. You're out of here. So what they did is they laid siege to the capital. Now, if you don't know what laid siege means, basically it means you have a walled city, and these people, sorry, and these people, okay, what they would do is they would surround your city. They would surround your city, and then they don't even have to attack it. They just have to sit there for a few years, and they would sit there for years. They would live off your land. They would live off your cattle, your food, your water, and they would basically starve the city into compliance. And it happened all the time throughout history. So that's what they did. They laid siege, and after 3 years, the capital fell. So basically, starvation and disease is the result of this. Once they gave in, they were gone. Almost everybody in Assyria was taken away. I'm sorry, not Assyria. In Israel was taken out. Some people, few were left, but most people were taken to captivity. But the thing is, we actually talked about this. The last day, when we talked about the law, we actually went over this a little bit. What happened was, in the law, God had a little thing in there they call the blessings and curses. It's Deuteronomy 28. Well, Deuteronomy 28 says, if you do what I say, it will go well with you. I will bless you. The countries will run from you. You will be the head, not the tail, it says. But sadly, this is what it says here. The Lord will, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, the Lord will cause your enemies to be defeated before your enemies. You will come from them in one direction, but flee from them in 7. This is exactly what happened. So God said this about 700 years prior to this happening. He promised them. And it was, now remember, the king was supposed to read this every year to remind themselves of this. The end of Israel is predicted in Isaiah. It actually is predicted in a lot more books, but I just grabbed Isaiah. Isaiah in 10:5-34 says, woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger. Basically, God saying, I'm going to send Assyria after you. Okay? Isaiah said this beforehand, and basically that Isaiah said that Assyria is going to be the one to take them out. And basically it said, look, he's going to seize, loot, snatch, plunder, and trample them down in the muds of their streets. Exactly what they did. Sadly. So, what happened? Well, after they took everybody away, then they deported the people, and what they did is they sent all of their own people back to live there. So Israel is no longer Israel anymore. It's really Assyria. Because the majority of the people living there was probably a few Israelis left, but the majority of them were actually Assyrian. And what happened is that, as it says in 2 Kings 17, 24 and 25, that they were living there and lions would come up and start killing people. And so they come and went to the king and said, hey, the king's like, what am I going to do? Lions are killing my people. So what the king decided to do was he was going to send a priest from Israel back to teach them how to live for God. And that is where we get the Sumerians. The Sumerian religion was based upon Baal worship, Ashtoreth worship, and God. Now, we're going to find that the Sumerians, we know throughout history, Sumerians will have their own temple. Sumerians will have their own, and we kind of find a glimpse of this in John chapter 4. So, some of the Israelis did come back over time, but the thing is, they would end up with synchronistic worship. They would remain hostile to Israel. Basically, I meant Judah. Sorry, it's supposed to be Judah. For centuries, but they would never truly become Jews. So you can understand why the Jews hated the Sumerians. They weren't Jewish, but they practiced some pseudo-Judaism. They had a pseudo-Judaism temple. And we find in Ezra, now this is circa 520. Remember, this was 722. 200 years later, even Judah comes back from Babylonian exile. And this is what happened. Basically what it was, they came to Ezra, the Sumerians, and said, hey, you guys are rebuilding your temple. We want to be part of that. We would love to do it. It'd be like the Mormons coming over here and saying, hey guys, I hear you're back. Wanted to get with us, and we're going to do it together. And you're like, no, that ain't going to happen. And that's exactly what they did. They basically said, no, we're not going to do it, because at this time they said, King Cyrus commanded us to build a temple to the Lord. So even now, 200 years later, they're dealing with the Sumerians. They didn't like them, because there was this huge hatred between the two. Now, it seems that the Sumerians would continue in that area. Pontius Pilate, now this is historical. This is not from the Bible, it's historical. It actually comes from Josephus. Pontius Pilate, we find, actually went to Samaria. The guy who killed Jesus, right? The guy who sent Jesus to the cross said, I'll wash my hands of you. Well, he actually went in and attacked the Samaritans and massacred some of them. So Rome got mad. Tiberius Caesar got mad and recalled Pontius Pilate. So Pilate actually left in 37 AD, never to come back. But, sorry. But the thing is, we find that Tiberius died and Pontius Pilate, we believe he went to Spain. So Pontius Pilate lived on, most likely. But even in history, the Sumerians were still there. Now, even after Israel, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, they still were there. Now, New Testament dealings with the Sumerians. So in Luke 10, 25, 37, the Good Samaritan, we find that the guy walks around the Good Samaritan. Now, granted, there was a fact that, if these priests come by and they see a dead person, they're not supposed to touch them. But I think the big issue was the guy dead? Most likely they would say he was still moving. So he wasn't dead. So it would have been okay to help him. And they didn't. That's the key, is they didn't. Okay? They would, but if he was lying there not moving or anything else, if they think he was dead, they literally can't touch him, part of the law. But the key is, I bet you he was still moving, because the next guy came over and checked on him, and they actually got him up and had moved him. And I don't think they did that in an ambulance, so the guy probably was able to walk. So most likely, that's what happened. So, but John chapter 4, the woman in the well, I really recommend you reading that, because you will find that where the woman says, well, you Jews say to do it over here in Jerusalem, but we do it over here. The idea is we worship God just a little differently than you do. So read that and see, because I think you guys will get like a big aha moment. Oh, really? That's the Sumerians from this. But did God abandon Israel after the split? Did God abandon Israel after, Jehoram and Rehoboam split the country? And then Jehoram and all their people after that never really, the kings never really served God after that. Did God abandon them? The answer is no. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this was one of the most active times of miracles after the Exodus. More miracles happened in Israel, not Judah, Israel. They were killing Jews. They were killing the prophets. They were Baal worship, everything else. But it was one of the most active times because of these guys. Now it's interesting. Elijah and Elisha are from the north. Next to Moses, they were the most prolific prophets. Now, to understand what the word prolific means, think of a field that is bountiful, that grows all this stuff. It's prolific, meaning it grows and great stuff comes from it. That's what prolific, or a tree with lots and lots of fruit. It's very prolific. It means good things come from it. That's kind of what these guys, Elijah and Elisha, they did a lot of miracles. Let's look at them. They were northern prophets. They almost exclusively dealt with the guys up north. The guys who did more miracles were up north. You would think, well, why wouldn't they be down south with God's people? Well, Elijah performed 8 miracles and Elisha 16, but a lot of scholars say that they actually did more than that. According to the word, there's things that specific things they did, but the miracles we're talking about are the real big ones, like they raised the dead and stuff like that. But some say they're actually more than that. They raised the dead and they called down fire on their enemies. Both of them did. Both raised someone from the dead, and they both called down fires. Remember, Elijah called down fires on the prophets of Baal, called down fire from heaven, and then they killed all Baal. And then Elisha called down fire on the captain, the 50 officers. Came in, okay, and they called down fire. So, you don't want to mess with these guys. Because we find in 2 Kings 2:23-25 that one of these kids called Elisha Baldy. Hey, Baldy! I mean, that's not the worst thing you could do to someone, but he decided to call a curse on him. And bears came out. But it's interesting, they actually give you the number of how many people got mauled by these bears. 42! It wasn't like 2 kids, it was 42 of them it mauled. Man, you don't mess with these guys. 42. Wow, some pretty prolific bears. So, anyway, but let's look at what happened with Jesus. He sent a message ahead who went to the Samaria village to get things ready for him, but the people there did not welcome because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" Ooh, that sounds familiar. Jesus turned and rebuked them. Why would they even ask Jesus to call down fire? Who do you think they thought Jesus was? In Malachi, we kind of get an idea. In Malachi, the last book of the Bible, or if you're Italian, Malachi, see, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to the children, the hearts of the children to their parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So they knew Elijah was going to come back. Because remember, they were Jewish, and they knew this stuff. They knew the word. And we also got to remember Elijah was taken to heaven. Okay? Now, I'm sorry, forgive me. Now remember, I did put the verses for this, so if you get the PowerPoint, go back to the first thing, Elijah and Elisha. It actually gives you all the verses for all of them, because they actually did a lot of stuff. But, so let's think what also happened. The Transfiguration, where Jesus met with who? 2 people. Who were they? Elijah and Moses. Now, that's interesting. Why didn't he meet with Abraham? Why didn't he meet with David? It's interesting that he met with the 2 people that were very that did a lot of miracles and led his people. Elijah, which is interesting. Elijah, but the verse says, to be sure, Elijah will come, and so this is in the Transfiguration, this is what Jesus said to them. To be sure, Elijah will come, will restore all things. Now remember, they thought that Jesus was Elijah, or else they would have asked him to call down fire. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him. But they have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer in their hands. The disciple understood that Jesus was not Elijah, he was God. Elijah was coming as John the Baptist. So when he called, it's not like John, it wasn't a Hindu thing that he would reincarnate. It wasn't that at all. But what he was doing is metaphorically saying that someone will come and show them the way, which was John the Baptist. So when they thought all the time that Jesus was Elijah, because Elijah was supposed to come, remember, Elijah had already come. All right. God was very active in this place that hated him. The miracles of Elijah were all to discredit Baal. So if you read in Kings, Baal worship was big time. So everything they did, Elijah and Elisha did for the reason because of Baal. When Elijah made it not rain for 3 years, and both he and Elijah both called down fire from heaven, it was like God did to the pharaohs. Because Baal was the god of storms, the god of heaven, the god of fire, and rain coming down because of lightning. So when Elijah and Elisha did those things, it was just like what God did through Moses and Aaron to the Pharaoh, discrediting their gods at every point. Talk about, we're serving these gods, but all of a sudden, Elijah and Elisha just, okay, it's not going to rain for 3 years. And you're trusting in the god of storms, which is Baal, but it doesn't rain for 3 years? God was trying to teach them something. So learning from these things will help us. As it says in Romans, for everything written in the past was written to teach us so that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures, that the encouragement they provide might give us hope. All right. This is why we study the Old Testament, ladies and gentlemen. This is it. We study the Old Testament because it all makes sense now. See how Elijah and Elisha and the New Testament came together? How Jonah came together? How all these things that we're learning all work together. We have to understand the Old Testament. You now understand Jesus more than you did before because now we saw from the Old Testament who he really is and what he did. So this is so important, and I also throw there reference 1 Corinthians 10. I didn't have a lot of time, so I didn't want to put it up there, but 1 Corinthians 10 is a good thing to read also in this way. If God worked miracles in Israel, even though they hated him, what will he do in America and in this church? I mean, think about it. If you read through Kings and you see how evil those guys were, how they were killing the prophets, they were killing Jews like crazy, why in the heck would God do more miracles up there than he did in the place where Jesus' lineage would come from? Because I'll tell you something. He didn't do that many miracles down in Judah. But remember, why did he do them? Because when a place is so evil, God wants to show everybody that he is still God, that he is Lord. So in this terrible time we live in today, think of what it would be. First of all, encourage one another and build each other up, just in the fact you are doing. We need to encourage each other now during these times. Because this isn't easy. Christians are becoming more and more a byword they used to be. But more importantly, this is what we need. In the same way, let your light shine before others. You know, when things are really, really evil, when things are really, really bad, and it's really dark, a little light on a hill can be seen from a long way away. I was thinking about that today. You know, I know when it's really, really dark and you have some guy with a candle on a hill, you can see it. May not be much, but you can see it. And that's what God's calling us to do. Because I promise you, when we get into Christian history and we go back to, you know, the Edict Milan, let me tell you, Christians, within 100 years after Christianity became legal in Roman Empire, we were seeing that the major leaders were sleeping, had concubines. These guys over here were doing all these things. There was huge problems in the church after that. But in the same way, we also see that in this, God worked mightily. And that's it today. So next week, actually in 3 weeks, we're going to start talking about the prophets. And we'll do the prophets. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you.